At a little after 9, Mara reached the public entrance with rain shining on her coat. It was light but steady, softening the paving stones and making the iron railings gleam. Drops gathered on leaves, slipped from the awning, and tapped the brim of her hood. She took the ring of 4 keys from her pocket. A long brass key, the smallest silver key, a key with a green label, and a blue marked key rested against one another. Their labels were written in clear block letters beneath the entrance light. Mara found the brass key marked public entrance, placed it in the lock, and turned it once. The mechanism gave. She opened the door inward, stepped into the entrance hall, and closed it carefully behind her. Through the glass, rain remained visible as a fine silver veil over the dark garden. For a moment she stood beneath the first lamp. Its frosted glass shade spread a honey-colored pool across the tiles. The rest of the hall was dim, but the light showed the reception desk, coat stand, broad staircase, and narrow table where the handover materials had been left. Mara removed her gloves and placed them beside the small logbook. She folded them together, smoothing one damp fingertip flat against the other, then wiped a bead of rain from her sleeve with her palm. The book had a dark green cover softened at the corners by use. On top lay the cream-colored handover card, its short list printed in black. She held it close to the lamp. Public entrance, unlocked. She checked the first line with the end of her pencil, then looked at the door. The handle rested in its proper position and the latch sat flush. She pressed the handle gently, released it, and marked the line with a small tick. The next line referred to the entrance lamps. Beside the desk, Mara turned on only the first 2. The lamp above reception and the one farther along the corridor. Their light joined the first pool, making a calm path across the floor. The higher windows reflected them back, so that outside there seemed to be another quiet building suspended in the rain. She stood at the end of the new path of light and looked along it. The first pool held the desk and the narrow table. The second reached the framed botanical print farther down the corridor. Between them, the dark blue tiles showed their pale grout lines and a few small scratches from pots and watering cans that had passed there in daylight. The lamps did not brighten the whole building, they made only the useful parts easy to see. Mara walked to the key table with the ring in her hand and read the labels in order. Public entrance, reception, citrus house, surface gate. She touched each corresponding key as she read it. The brass key, the smallest silver key, the green labeled key, and the blue marked key. The ring made a faint sound each time it settled against the tabletop. All present. She copied the phrase into the logbook. Her handwriting leaned slightly to the right, and the pencil made a soft, dry sound over the paper. When she finished, she placed it along the book's spine. She checked that the date was on the same line as the time, then closed the book over the entry and opened it again to the handover card. The card lay flat beneath her hand. The hall smelled faintly of wax and wet wool. A shallow bowl held spare clips and rubber bands. A folded umbrella leaned against the umbrella stand. On the reception desk, blank visitor cards waited beneath a paperweight shaped like a smooth gray stone. Somewhere in the building, water moved through a pipe and settled again. Mara picked up the logbook, keeping the handover card on top beneath her thumb. She slipped the key ring into her coat pocket, where it rested as a small weight against her hip, and followed the lit corridor. The second lamp was mounted above a framed botanical print. Its shade cast a warm oval across dark leaves, pale flowers, and a small painted label. Mara did not stop to read it. She noticed the leaves, the steady border of the frame, and the rain tracing the window beside it. At the end of the corridor stood the citrus house door. It was taller than the others, fitted with a broad pane of glass divided by narrow wooden bars. Beyond it lay softened darkness. A low lamp inside showed the faint outline of a bench and the nearest broad leaves. Mara took the green labeled key, marked Citrus House from the ring. She placed the logbook on the ledge beside the door, with the handover card open on top, turned the key so its label faced upward, and checked it against the card. Citrus House. First lamps. She found the small switch on the wall and turned it on. Inside, the first lamps came alive, one by one along the threshold. Their light touched the glazed roof, tiled path, and leaves nearest the door. Moisture softened the glass from within. The room gathered itself gently around the new light. Mara unlocked the door, but did not open it wide. She withdrew the key and rested her hand on the handle. A little warmth reached her fingers through the metal. When she eased the door inward, mild, damp air met her, carrying the clean green scent of leaves and the rounded sweetness of oranges. She kept the door at her shoulder and looked first at the lamp nearest the threshold. Its shade faced inward over the tiles, as the handover card described. Farther along, another light made a pale oval between the pots. The bench remained a simple dark shape beyond the first leaves. No part of the room asked her to go farther before the next line of the card. Mara remained at the threshold, with the open handover card resting on the logbook beside her, the rain behind her, and the first lamps shining ahead. She wrote down the lamps in their order, noting the ones nearest the door and the softer glow beyond them. The pencil returned to the ledge beside the open card. Mara returned the green labeled key to the ring with the other 3 keys and slipped the complete ring back into her coat pocket. Her hand rested briefly on the card's lower corner. The nearest pot held a dark rounded leaf turned toward the lamp. Mara noticed its smooth edge, the wet glass beyond it, and the clear tile at the beginning of the path. Outside, rain touched the glass roof in a quiet, even pattern. Inside, warm air moved among the leaves. The door remained open at her shoulder. The open handover card remained on top of the logbook on the ledge beside her, and the ring of 4 keys rested in her coat pocket. Behind her, the entrance hall held its soft pools of lamplight, each one steady, each one in its place. Mara paused at the Citrus House threshold, with the handover card resting in her left hand. Beyond the glass door, the lamps she had entered on the logbook cast small pools of amber among the leaves. Their light caught on waxy surfaces and disappeared into the darker branches above. Rain tapped softly against the roof panels, thin and even, as though someone were brushing a fingertip along the glass. She read the first line again. Citrus, entrance lamp, low bracket, facing inward. Far lamp, high bracket, angled toward the central path. The card had been written in a narrow, practical hand. Mara held it beneath the corridor light and compared the words with what she could see. The entrance lamp stood on the left, mounted just above shoulder height. Its shade pointed toward the interior, not across the doorway. She stepped 1 pace inside and looked back at it from the path. The beam fell where the cards suggested, over the first stretch of tiled floor and the nearest pots. She marked the position with her pencil, not yet in the logbook, but on the margin of the handover card, a small tick beside the first instruction. The second lamp was farther in, suspended from a dark metal arm. Its light reached down through the leaves and lay across the central path in a pale oval. Mara moved beneath it, then turned toward the doorway. From there, the angle was easier to judge. The lamp was not aimed at the glass or at the ceiling. It illuminated the path and the broad leaves along its edge, leaving the opposite side in a gentler shadow. A drop of rain slid down the outside of the door and bent the corridor lights into a wavering line. She made the second tick. At the end of the card, below the lamp positions, a small square held the overnight temperature reading. Mara lifted the card closer. The number had been written at the previous handover. 18.5 degrees Celsius. She looked toward the instrument fixed beside the inner frame. Its narrow display showed 18.4. She waited without touching it. The figures remained steady. Mara wrote the reading on the back of the card, adding the time from her watch. The pencil point made a dry whisper across the paper. Then she slipped the card into the clear sleeve attached to the clipboard, leaving the fresh note visible through the plastic. She stepped into the corridor and drew the glass door closed behind her. It settled against the frame with a soft click. Before she fetched the watering can, Mara stepped back into the entrance hall. The rain had left a dark shine across the shoulders of her coat and a few drops at the cuff. She took the coat off slowly, shook the sleeves once over the tiles, and hung it on the coat stand beside the public door. The cardigan beneath it was dry and plain. From the coat pocket, she took the complete ring of labeled keys and placed it on the entrance hall hookboard near the door. She checked that the green citrus house label faced outward. The keys settled together with a small metallic sound. She returned through the corridor in her cardigan, with the clipboard under her arm, leaving the citrus house key with the other labeled keys on the board. The watering can stood beside the potting bench, where the corridor widened before the glasshouse door. It was a modest metal can with a long, curved spout and a rose head fitted over the end. Mara picked it up by the handle and felt its weight. Empty, or nearly so. She tilted it slightly. A little water moved inside with a quiet slap. She carried it back through the corridor to the tap set into the wall beside the entrance hall. The handle turned stiffly at first, then gave way. Water struck the bottom of the can and rang against the metal. Mara watched the level rise, pausing when it reached the mark painted near the inside rim. She closed the tap firmly, lifted the can with both hands, and waited for the last thread of water to fall from the spout. On the way back, she kept the can close to her hip. The entrance lamps glowed behind her, and the labeled keys rested in their place on the hook board near the public door. Their tags shifted once as a draft moved through the hall. Outside, the rain had darkened the paving stones. Inside, the citrus house warmth pressed gently against the glass. She opened the door with her elbow. The nearest tree was a small calamondin in a square terracotta pot, its branches carrying a few round fruits no larger than walnuts. Mara lowered the watering can and tested the rose with her thumb. The stream softened into a fine spread. She directed it toward the soil, circling the base rather than wetting the leaves. Water darkened the earth in widening rings. When a narrow gleam appeared at the drainage holes, she shifted the can away and let the soil absorb what it had received. The next tree stood just beyond it, taller and more open, with a slender trunk and leaves that trembled when the rain struck the roof. Mara moved along the near side of the path, keeping the can tilted only as far as needed. She watered the second pot, then the third, each time watching the change in the soil before moving on. There was no reason to reach deeper into the house. The handover card specified the nearest trees only, and the first three were within comfortable reach of the doorway. She left the farther rows untouched. A small bead of water clung to the lip of the rose and fell onto the tile. Mara set the can down beside the bench and opened the logbook. The pages were ruled in narrow columns: time, place, observation, action. She dated the line and wrote slowly. 2118, Citrus House. Entrance lamp positioned on low bracket, facing inward. Far lamp positioned on high bracket, angled across central path. Both positions agree with handover card. Temperature card read 18.5 degrees Celsius at handover. Wall display steady at 18.4 to. Watered nearest 3 citrus trees only. Soil moistened to drainage. No standing water observed. She read the entry from beginning to end. The words fitted within their boxes. No correction was needed. Mara added her initials in the final margin, then rested the pencil across the spine. The watering can waited where she had left it. She lifted it, carried it to the tap in the entrance hall, and poured out the small amount remaining in the bottom. The metal gave a hollow note as the last drops struck the drain. She returned the can to its place beside the bench, spout turned inward, handle parallel with the edge. Back at the threshold, she closed the logbook for the moment and held it against her cardigan. The warm air touched her face. Leaves shifted faintly overhead, responding to the small currents made by the door. Beyond them, rain moved over the glass in long silver threads, carrying the amber lamps downward through the leaves, until the whole citrus house seemed to hold the weather at a comfortable distance. The watering can felt lighter on the way back. Mara carried it by the handle, keeping the narrow spout angled upward so that the last drops would not trail across the floor. Under her other arm, she held the logbook and clipboard close against her side. Behind her, the citrus trees held their fresh water in the dark soil around their trunks. Their leaves gave off a warm green scent, sharpened slightly by the rain beyond the glass. The low entrance lamp made a quiet pool near the door, while the higher lamp at the far end showed only a few pale leaves and the faint shine of the paths. At the small entrance hall counter, she set the watering can beside the sink. She placed the logbook beneath the lamp and opened it to the page for her first round. Then she slid the temperature card from the clipboard sleeve and secured it beneath the clip on the counter, where its reading would remain easy to see. The counter was plain and useful, made from dark wood worn smooth at the front corners. A pencil rested in the fold of the open logbook. There was a shallow tray for keys, a small tin of matches, and a folded cloth for drying the counter when rain was carried in on shoes. Beneath the worktop, partly hidden behind the lower shelf, something white caught her attention. Mara bent to see it properly. It was an enamel kettle, small enough to lift with one hand. Its body was a quiet cream color, dulled by years of use, with a blue line around the lid and another around the base. One side had a little brown mark where water had dried against the enamel. The black handle was smooth at the place where fingers had worn it, and the short spout ended in a cap that no longer sat quite straight. Nothing about it suggested display or care beyond what was needed. It was an ordinary kettle kept where an ordinary kettle was useful. A square of paper had been tucked beneath its tray. The paper was thicker than the pages in the logbook, and its corners had softened from being handled. Mara slid it out with 2 fingers. The writing leaned gently to the right, in dark blue ink. The letters were narrow and even, though the capital letters were larger than the rest, as if written by someone who preferred the page to remain orderly. There was no date, no name, and no explanation. It said, "Night caretaker may make tea after the first round. Please leave the kettle filled for the day gardener." Mara read it once, then again, not because it was difficult, but because the small instruction belonged to the place in a way she had not expected. She pictured the note being written at the counter, perhaps during an afternoon when the house was bright and busy. Someone had wanted to make a simple arrangement. Clear. The night shift could have tea. The morning shift should not find an empty kettle. That was all. She folded the paper along its existing crease and placed it back beneath the tray. Then she took out the kettle. The shelf beneath the counter was dry except for a fine scatter of grit near the wall. Mara moved the kettle to the sink, set into the end of the counter, and lifted the lid. Inside, the metal was clean, with a faint pale ring around the bottom. She turned the tap and let the first cold thread run for a moment. The sound was small in the hall, a silver trickle under the steady hush of rain. She filled the kettle to just below the marked line. She watched the surface rise and stop short of the rim. A few drops clung to the spout when she set the kettle down. The blue line around the lid caught the counter lamp, then lost its shine as she turned toward the tap. While the water rose, she rested one hand on the counter and listened to the citrus house. The building made small, ordinary sounds at night. A soft tick from cooling metal, a muted drip where water had found a leaf, and the slight movement of warm air among the plants. Nothing called for her attention. The lamps were steady. The temperature reading remained in her thoughts as a settled fact, 18.4 degrees Celsius, and the nearest 3 trees had received what they needed. When the kettle was full, she closed the tap and replaced the lid. A little water had gathered around the base, so she wiped it with the folded cloth. Then she carried the kettle back to the counter and found its round heating base pushed against the wall. The cable was looped neatly around it. Mara drew the base forward, guided the cable to the socket, and pressed the plug into place. The kettle sat securely on its circle of black plastic. Its blue rim caught the lamp for an instant and then became quiet again. She returned to the open logbook. The page already held the entries from her first round: the low entrance lamp, the high far lamp, the wall temperature, water given to the nearest 3 citrus trees. Mara placed the pencil beside the final line and wrote one more sentence beneath them. Kettle filled for day gardener. She did not add anything about the note. The note had already said what mattered, and the logbook was for practical things that needed to be known later. The filled kettle belonged there. The rest could remain on the folded paper beneath the tray. Mara closed the pencil between her fingers for a moment, then left the book open. The counter held the kettle, the clipped temperature card, and the watering can in a simple row. She moved the can a finger's width nearer the wall so it would not catch the edge of the path, then let her hand fall to her side. She carried no cup with her. There was no need to make tea yet. The kettle had only just been set down, and the first round was still part of the beginning of the night. She stepped away from the counter and walked back toward the citrus house, following the narrow strip of light that crossed the entrance hall. At the threshold, she paused. The warm air reached her face, carrying the fragrance of leaves, damp bark, and watered earth. Beyond the glass, rain touched the roof and slid down in wavering lines. The garden outside was almost without detail, reduced to dark shapes and pale reflections. Inside, the citrus leaves gathered the light in small surfaces, some glossy, some shadowed, all of them still. Mara kept one hand on the doorframe. Behind her, the counter lamp shone over the logbook. The kettle rested on its base, cream enamel against dark wood, with its imperfect spout and worn handle. Ahead, the trees waited in their rows, not for anything dramatic, only for the steady care that belonged to the hours before morning. A faint click came from beneath the kettle. Then the first warming sound began, a soft, contained hum from the little base, almost hidden beneath the rain. Mara listened to it from the threshold, with the leaves warm in view, the rain moving gently over the glass, and her open logbook waiting nearby. The cream enamel kettle warmed at the entrance hall counter, giving off a quiet breath of heat. Mara had filled it for the day gardener, as the ordinary note requested, and now it rested beneath the soft ceiling light, while rain moved over the glass roof of the citrus house. The countercloth was still damp from the watering round. Mara lifted it with both hands. It was a square of faded blue cotton, heavier at the corners where water had gathered. She brought the edges together once, then again, making a long, neat fold. A cool line of moisture darkened the fabric along her fingers. She laid the folded cloth beside the sink, where it could dry without touching the floor. Near the kettle, a small ring of water shone on the metal tray. It had come from the spout or from the cloth, or perhaps from the careful traffic of the first round. Mara took the dry side of the folded cloth and pressed it to the ring. The cotton drew the water inward. She turned the cloth to a clean patch and passed it over the tray again, following the curve of the mark until the metal showed only a soft reflection of the lamp. The kettle continued to warm. On the counter, held in a simple clip, was the temperature card for the citrus house. The card had a narrow green border and a few lines of neat writing from the evening reading. Mara released the clip with her thumb. The little spring resisted, then opened. She slid the card free and looked at the corners. One had curled slightly from the damp air. She flattened it against the counter with the heel of her hand. Then she guided it back beneath the clip, making sure the writing faced outward and the lower edge sat straight. The spring closed with a faint, dry click. Mara touched the top of the card once, not to press it harder, but to feel that it held. She looked from the card to the kettle, and then to the open logbook. The page was dry, and the pencil still lay across its spine. She squared the pencil with the ruled lines before leaving the counter. It was a small adjustment, but it gave the work surface a quiet, finished look. Beyond the counter, two young citrus branches had begun to lean away from the nearest tree's thicker growth. They were light branches, pale green at their tips and flexible beneath their leaves. A bamboo support stood beside them, slender as a finger, its lower end set into the soil, and its upper end resting just below the roof beams. Mara carried the garden twine from the shallow drawer beneath the counter. It was soft, tan, and slightly fuzzy, wound around a small wooden spool. She unwound a length with her left hand, while her right hand held the spool still. The twine slid quietly across the wood. At the tree, she lifted the first branch only as far as it wished to go. Its leaves trembled, brushing the sleeve of her cardigan. A new leaf, still folded at the center, pressed lightly against her knuckle. Mara waited until the branch stopped moving. She brought the twine around the bamboo and the branch together, leaving a little space between the fibers and the green stem. The tie was loose enough for growth, but close enough to offer direction. She crossed the ends and made a small bow, then tucked the longer end beneath the crossing so it would not hang into the leaves. The branch settled against the bamboo. Its leaves opened again, one by one, catching the warm air. The second branch lay lower and angled toward the bench. Mara supported it beneath the leaves while she drew another length of twine from the spool. The branch was thinner than the first. She chose a point where its surface was smooth and unmarked, then wrapped the twine around the bamboo and the stem in a broad, gentle loop. Her fingers worked slowly. The twine made a quiet rasp against the bamboo. She tied it with the same small bow, leaving the ends short. When she released the branch, it remained near the support, not pulled tight, only encouraged. A pair of leaves turned slightly toward the lamp. Their undersides were silvered with moisture. Mara stood back one pace. The two ties showed as small tan marks among the leaves. The branches were no longer in the path, and the pot rims remained clear around their bases. She did not change anything else. She returned the spool to the counter and placed the loose scissors beside it. The kettle had reached its warmth. It did not whistle. Instead, a muted sound gathered inside it, a low stirring that rose and fell beneath the cream enamel. She took a plain cup from the shelf above the counter. It was white without a mark or handle ornament, and warm from the air near the kettle. Beside the cups was a small, open box of plain paper tea packets. Mara took one packet, opened it, and set the tea bag in the cup. She poured hot water from the kettle over it. Steam lifted in a narrow ribbon, carrying the mild scent of tea leaves and hot water. She filled the cup nearly to the rim, then waited for the surface to become still. When the tea had deepened to a soft amber, she lifted the bag by its paper tab, let the last drops return to the cup, and placed it on the metal tray. The note beneath the tray had asked that the kettle be left filled for the day gardener. Mara carried the kettle to the sink, turned the cold tap, and filled it again to just below the marked line. She replaced the lid, dried the base with the blue cloth, and returned the filled kettle to its round base at the counter. Its heating switch remained off. The water inside was cool and still, ready for the next person named by the note. The logbook still lay open at the counter, where she had left it after recording the filled kettle. Mara carried the cup to the citrus house bench first, placing it near the inner edge where her hand could reach it. Then she returned to the counter, closed her hand around the logbook and its pencil, and carried both from the counter to the bench. She opened the book beside the cup and took up the pencil. Under the last entry, she wrote, "Two light branches tied to bamboo support with soft twine." She watched the pencil point make the final period. Then she closed the book, leaving the pencil across its cover. Mara sat on the bench. The rain was quieter from here, though each drop still found its place on the roof. Some struck the glass with a fine tapping. Others slipped together and traveled in shining threads toward the gutters. The citrus leaves held the sound close. Warm air moved around them, carrying the clean green smell of stems and damp soil. Her cup rested between both hands. The porcelain warmed her palms. A short end of tan twine had escaped the second bow and lay against the bamboo, its fibers lifted like the nap of a small brush. Mara could see it without turning her head. One of the branches moved when the air shifted. The tie gave slightly, then returned. A leaf brushed another leaf with a sound softer than paper. The new leaf near Mara's hand remained folded, its tip bright and tender. She took a sip of tea. The heat passed slowly from her mouth to her throat, and the rain continued above her. On the bench, the cup gathered a faint ring of warmth beneath its base. Near it, the logbook waited beneath the pencil. At the support, the little bow held its branch gently in place. The leaves shone under the lamp, and the loose twine end rested against the bamboo, while rain traced the roof in silver lines. Mara finished the last of her tea on the citrus house bench. The cup had cooled enough that she could hold it without shifting her fingers. Near the counter, the refilled cream enamel kettle stood on its base with its lid closed and its heating switch off. The temperature card remained beneath its clip. Beyond the bench, the two young citrus branches rested against their bamboo supports. Their leaves moved only when the warm air changed near the roof. For a little while, she listened to the rain crossing the panes. It was not loud inside the house. The glass held most of it above the trees, and what reached her was a broad, even sound. Drops collected at the upper frames and traveled down in narrow tracks. At the far end of the room, the lamps made pale circles on the tiled path between the pots. The blue countercloth lay folded beside the sink. It had dried at the corners but remained dark through the middle. Mara picked it up and felt the weight of the damp cotton across her palm. In the shallow drawer below the counter, the spare coil of tan twine waited beside the scissors. She took that as well, slipping the loop around 2 fingers so it would not unroll as she walked. Before leaving the bench, she set the empty cup back near its inner edge, where it had rested beside the closed logbook. She left it there. The kettle remained at the counter with the clipped card and the folded note beneath the tray. Neither needed to travel with her. Putting the cloth and spare twine away took only a moment. Mara was already beside the citrus house counter, where she had found both things. She opened the shallow drawer beneath it and returned the coil beside the scissors. With one finger, she pressed the loose end under the nearest turn so it would not unroll. Then she closed the drawer until its front sat level with the counter. She opened the blue cloth once, found that its middle was still damp, and folded it more loosely than before. She laid it beside the sink with its corners spread apart. The counter lamp showed the darker center of the cotton and the paler edges that had begun to dry. Nothing else needed to be carried away. Mara checked the short line of things on the counter. The filled kettle remained on its base, lid closed and switch off. The clipped temperature card faced outward. The folded note stayed beneath the tray. The drawer held the twine and scissors. She left them in that plain arrangement and checked that the empty cup was still steady on the bench beside the closed logbook. The citrus house door stood closed at the end of the tiled path. Mara opened it and stepped into the entrance hall. The air changed first. The citrus house was warm and wet with leaf scent. The hall was cooler, with old tile and the faint dry smell of the notice board. Mara drew the door nearly closed behind her, leaving a narrow line of warm light at the frame. Her own wet coat hung on the coat stand near the public door. The complete ring of labeled keys rested on the hook board beside it, tags facing outward. Rain marked the outer windows in wavering lines. The hall lamps were lower than those in the citrus house, each shade directing its light onto a small section of floor. Mara walked through one pale pool and then another with empty hands. The entrance hall seemed wider on the way back. Without the cloth and twine, she noticed the long, dark blue tiles under her shoes and the pale grout between them. The lamps reflected in the polished parts of the floor, broken by the small scratches left from years of pots and watering cans passing through. At the notice board, the edge of the gardener's note lifted slightly in the moving air, then lay flat again. She did not stop to read it. She had already done what it asked. At the reception desk, the dark green logbook's earlier place was empty. Mara noticed the clear patch of wood, the paperweight shaped like a smooth gray stone, and the stack of blank visitor cards beneath it. The counter near the citrus house door was farther along the hall, out of reach from here. She had left its kettle where it belonged, and the cup was still on the bench inside the warm room. She did not need to check either one again. The rain showed in the upper windows as thin lines that met and separated. Beneath them, the two entrance lamps made soft reflected ovals on the tiles. Mara passed through the nearer oval, then the other. Her footsteps remained light. The dry cardigan moved easily at her wrists, while the coat on its hook stayed behind her near the public door. At the coat stand, her coat had begun to lose the bright wet shine at its shoulders. Mara touched one cuff with 2 fingers and then left it on its hook. The keys remained on their board. She walked on toward the citrus house door in her dry cardigan, the hall lamps making a simple path before her. Warmth reached her through the narrow gap at the frame. The nearest leaves were visible beyond the glass, each one outlined by the first lamp. Mara rested her hand on the handle and stood there for a moment. The 2 supported branches were near the bench. The bamboo rose beside them in straight, pale lengths. The tan ties held the stems with room to grow, neither pulling the bark nor allowing the new leaves to drift toward the path. One branch leaned a little toward the glass as it had before. The other pointed upward through the low green of the tree. Mara opened the door and stepped inside. The bench waited beside the closed logbook. Her empty cup stood where she had left it. At the counter, the cream enamel kettle remained on its base, and the temperature card faced outward beneath its clip. She did not sit down again. Instead, she remained near the doorway and let the room settle around her in its evening arrangement. Pots along the path, lamps above the leaves, dark soil beneath the trees. Rain traveled down the glass beside one supported branch. Mara remained near the citrus house doorway after her quiet walk through the entrance hall. The empty cup stood on the bench beside the closed logbook. The refilled cream enamel kettle remained at the counter, its lid closed and its heating switch off beneath the counter lamp. The clipped temperature card faced outward. These small things were easy to see from where she stood, each one left in the place it had reached during the evening. Rain had settled into a steady sound above her. It no longer arrived in separate taps against the roof, each one easy to distinguish. Water moved over the glass in a fuller hush now, running along the upper panes and slipping down in clear threads. Beyond the roof and walls, the garden had become a softened arrangement of dark hedges, wet paving, and the occasional pale mark of stone. Inside, the warmth remained close to the trees. Damp earth rested in the pots around the nearest trunks. Leaves gave off their faint green scent. A drop gathered at the point of a broad leaf, held for a moment, and fell into the soil with a sound too quiet to rise above the rain. The 2 young branches she had tied earlier rested against their bamboo supports near the bench. The tan twine held its small bows against the stems without pulling them tight. Mara looked at the branches for a moment. The ties lay where she had put them. The bamboo stood straight in the soil. A shallow dark patch remained at the base of the nearest pot, where water had reached the earth earlier. The surface had lost its first shine and become soft-looking again. She walked along the central path at an unhurried pace. Her shoes made a soft sound on the tiles. The low entrance lamp made an amber pool near the doorway. Farther in, the high lamp cast a pale oval across part of the path, just as the handover card had described. The beam reached the tiles and the nearest leaves without striking the glass. Mara stopped at the edge of that pale oval. The rims of the nearest pots made quiet half circles against the tiles. One leaf held a narrow line of brightness along its middle, while the leaves behind it faded into shadow. The bamboo supports made thin marks across the soil. When rain moved more heavily over the glass, their reflections trembled for a moment. Though the supports themselves did not move, she did not adjust the lamps. Their positions had been checked and written down. She only looked once from the low lamp to the far one, then down the clear part of the path between the pots. It was enough to know where the light fell. Near the bench, Mara rested her fingertips on its cool wooden edge. The empty cup was near the inner side, exactly where she had set it. Beside it, the closed logbook made a dark green rectangle under the pencil. She did not open the book or lift the cup. The worn grain of the bench caught a small reflection from the far lamp, then lost it when a fresh stream of rain passed over the pane. Mara looked toward the counter. The kettle was still there, cream enamel against the dark wood. Its black handle made a curved shape beneath the counter lamp. The folded note remained beneath the tray, and the green border of the temperature card showed above the clip. The counter had become quiet after the earlier work. The sink, the tray, the kettle, and the card arranged in a short, plain line. She left the counter as it was. At the glass door, Mara placed her hand around the edge and drew it toward her. The hinge moved without a scrape. Warm air passed lightly across her wrist as the opening narrowed. When the latch met its plate, it gave a quiet click. She kept her hand on the door for one breath. On the citrus house side, the tiles beside the threshold were dry. Beyond the door, the entrance hall remained still beneath its incense lamps. The corridor light rested on the floor in an unbroken strip. Her coat hung on the coat stand near the public door. The labeled keys remained on the hookboard, their small tags turned outward. Mara released the latch and stayed on the citrus house side. The building had changed only in the small ways that came with the later hour. The hall lamps appeared softer through the door glass. The rain became a little fuller over the roof. The damp soil around the nearest trees had darkened from wet black to a quieter brown. She walked back along the path toward the bench. The leaves above her had turned nearly black-green, their polished surfaces catching and losing the lamplight as she moved. A bead of water trembled at the point of one leaf. It gathered another small drop from the air, grew rounder, and fell into the pot below. Along the glass, a run of water followed one roof frame and widened as it traveled. At the lower pane, it broke into drops that caught the lamplight one after another. Mara paused by the supported branches. One tie made a small tan curve around the bamboo and stem. The other showed just below a pair of leaves. Both branches rested with room around them. The new leaf she had noticed earlier was still folded at its center. Bright only where the low light reached it, she let her hands rest together and moved on without touching it. At the far lamp, she looked down at the pale oval on the tiles. The marks left by the watering round had dried into darker shapes near the pots. The path between them was clear. From here, the bench, the counter, and the glass door formed quiet landmarks in the room. Mara could see each without needing to make a plan for any of them. She returned to the bench and sat down carefully, leaving the cup and logbook undisturbed beside her. The bench gave a small wooden sound under her weight, then held still. Her cardigan had warmed from the citrus house air. She rested her hands together in her lap and looked through the nearest leaves toward the glass. The rain made the outside world uneven. A line of hedge appeared, dissolved behind a fresh run of water, and appeared again farther along the pane. Wet ground and dark growth remained beyond it, but without sharp edges. The lamps from inside made pale reflections that traveled with the drops and thinned as they reached the lower frames. For a while, Mara watched those reflections. One amber thread crossed the glass near the doorway. Another paler one lay over the central path. Each was broken and joined again by water moving down the panes. The rain did not ask for notice. It simply continued above the roof and along the glass. The citrus leaves stayed close around the bench. Some showed their pointed ends and narrow stems. Others gathered into deeper shapes near the upper panes. One small calamandan fruit hung low beneath a branch, round and green, with a dull shine where the light reached it. The supported branches stood to one side, their leaves open again, after the small work of tying. Mara listened to the roof and the occasional fall of water from leaf to soil. She could smell the dampness held in the pots and the clean sweetness of the citrus trees. The air against her face was warmer than the glass above it. The path lay pale between the bench and the door. At its far end, the low lamp gave the tiles a soft edge. Beyond that, the glass door stood closed, its wooden bars dark against the corridor light. The counter was still visible, near the sink, with the kettle in place and the card beneath its clip. Nothing in the room asked her to cross back to it. She remained where she was. Rain continued to move over the roof in an even, close sound. A few drops struck more firmly near the upper frame, then joined the softer wash of water traveling toward the gutter. The glass held wavering reflections from the lamps. Amber near the threshold, paler along the central path, faintly gold where the light reached the nearest leaves. Mara watched one reflection tremble across the pane. A drop crossed it and pulled it downward. Another followed, carrying a small thread of warm light through the dark garden beyond. The rain changed the glass a little at a time. A clear patch opened near the low lamp, then a fresh line of water crossed it. The nearest leaves stayed sharp against that moving surface, while the farther leaves became softer green shapes beneath the roof. Mara watched the change without following it closely. She listened again to the room. Rain above the panes, a light brush of one leaf against another, and water settling in the pots. The sounds did not compete. They came and went within the same warm space. Mara kept her hands together in her lap and let the glass house remain still around her. The empty cup stayed on the bench beside the closed logbook. The kettle stayed at the counter. The two tied branches rested near their bamboo supports. Her coat and the labeled keys remained in the entrance hall, each where she had left it. Mara let her eyes rest on the glass house around her. The warm leaves, the pale tiles, the low lamps, and the rain moving over the roof. Nothing shifted beyond the small movements of water and leaves. Nothing needed to be carried farther into the night. Outside, rain continued over the garden. Inside, the warm citrus house rested under the rain.